day my sister Vivian walked onto that Navy SEAL training range, grown men actually laughed out loud. I'm talking about hardened military instructors who had seen combat in 3 different theaters of war, and they were laughing like schoolboys at a joke. What they didn't know was that she'd been preparing for this moment her entire life, and in the next 60 seconds, she was about to make military history. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. Picture this. It's a scorching Tuesday morning at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, and I'm standing there in my Navy instructor uniform, watching my little sister get sized up like she's some kind of curiosity at a county fair. Vivian Caldwell, all 5 feet 4 inches of her, walking with that same determined stride I remembered from when she was 8 years old and decided she was going to climb the tallest oak tree on Grandpa's ranch. Her hands were calloused from years of handling weapons. Her eyes had that 1,000-yard stare that comes from 3 combat deployments in Afghanistan, and her jaw was set in a way that should have been a warning to everyone in that room. But they didn't see any of that. All they saw was a woman in civilian clothes carrying a worn leather gun case, requesting permission to participate in their exclusive boys' club evaluation. The same evaluation that had broken down seasoned Marine snipers and sent Army Rangers packing. Chief Petty Officer Martinez actually snorted when she introduced herself. Sergeant Brooks, a mountain of a man who'd earned his reputation in Fallujah, crossed his arms and shook his head like he was watching someone try to park a minivan in a motorcycle space. I knew something they didn't, though. I'd grown up with Vivian. I'd seen her put 3 rounds through a silver dollar at 100 yards when she was 16. I'd watched her outshoot our grandfather, a Korean War veteran who could thread a needle at 50 paces. Most importantly, I'd seen that look in her eyes before, and it never ended well for whoever was on the receiving end of her focus. The laughter was about to stop, permanently. To understand why that moment on the range mattered so much, you need to know where Vivian came from. We grew up on a cattle ranch outside Billings, Montana, where the horizon stretched forever, and silence was something you could actually hear. Our grandfather, Hank Caldwell, owned 3,000 acres of some of the most beautiful and unforgiving land you've ever seen. He was a Korean War veteran who'd learned to shoot in frozen foxholes and never forgot that precision could mean the difference between coming home and coming home in a box. Vivian was 7 when Grandpa first put a rifle in her hands. Most kids that age were still learning to tie their shoes, but there she was, barely able to support the weight of his old Winchester, listening to him explain breath control like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Viv," he'd say in that gravelly voice that commanded attention from everyone within earshot. "Precision isn't about strength, it's about discipline and heart. The strongest cowboy in Montana can't hit the broadside of a barn if he doesn't have the patience to do it right." Everything changed when I was 14 and Vivian was 12. Dad was driving home from a livestock auction in Great Falls when a drunk driver ran a red light and ended our childhood in a single devastating moment. Mom fell apart completely, spending months in what she called her dark place, leaving Grandpa Hank to raise 2 grieving kids who didn't understand why good people had to die. That's when Vivian really found her calling. While I threw myself into sports and tried to stay busy enough to avoid thinking, she spent every free moment with Grandpa on the range he'd built behind the barn. It became their sacred space, a place where the only sounds were wind through the grass and the satisfying crack of bullets finding their targets. He taught her everything he knew about marksmanship, but more than that, he taught her about focus, about channeling pain into purpose. By the time she was 16, Vivian could put 3 rounds through a silver dollar at 100 yards. By 18, she was out shooting men twice her age at county competitions, earning a reputation that stretched across 3 states. Grandpa would beam with pride, telling anyone who'd listen about his little sparrow, who could shoot the wings off a fly without disturbing its body. After high school, Vivian enlisted in the Army, specializing in marksmanship and earning commendations that most soldiers only dream about. She did 3 deployments in Afghanistan, where her precision saved lives and earned respect from hardened infantry soldiers who initially questioned whether a ranch girl from Montana belonged in their world. Every letter she sent home was addressed to Grandpa first, me second, and Mom third, because he was still her anchor, her source of strength. But 6 months before that day at the Navy range, we lost him. Grandpa Hank suffered a massive heart attack while checking cattle in the north pasture, alone except for his horse and the endless Montana sky he loved so much. Vivian was finishing her army contract in Germany and couldn't make it home in time to say goodbye. His last words, according to our neighbor who found him, were about her. "Tell my little sparrow to show them what a Caldwell can do." When Vivian finally made it home for the funeral, she was different. The easy confidence was still there, but underneath it was something rawer, more desperate. She blamed herself for not being there, for choosing military service over family time, for missing the chance to hear his voice one last time. She'd completed her army service and was working private security contracts, but I could tell she was drifting, searching for something to fill the void that losing Grandpa had created. That's when she heard about the Navy's experimental program, an initiative testing whether former Army personnel could integrate with SEAL teams for specialized marksmanship missions. It was exactly the kind of challenge that would have made Grandpa proud, the kind of opportunity he would have pushed her to pursue. As her older brother and a Navy instructor, I was caught between two impossible positions. Part of me wanted to protect her from what I knew would be a brutal evaluation process designed to break down the strongest candidates. But another part of me recognized that this might be exactly what she needed. A chance to prove to herself that Grandpa's faith in her wasn't misplaced. Our relationship had been strained since the funeral, weighted down by guilt and unspoken blame. She carried Grandpa's vintage 1911 pistol everywhere now, a constant reminder of his belief in her abilities, and I knew that this evaluation had become about more than just career advancement. For Vivian, it was about honoring his memory and proving that a Caldwell could still surprise the world. The morning Vivian decided to submit her formal request, I watched her stare at the paperwork for 20 minutes before signing it. Her hand was steady, but I could see the weight of what she was asking for in the set of her shoulders. This wasn't just any program she was trying to join. The Navy's Advanced Maritime Marksmanship Initiative was their most exclusive evaluation, designed specifically for SEAL candidates who showed exceptional shooting potential. In 2 years of operation, only 12 men had passed the comprehensive assessment, and 3 of those had washed out during follow-up training. The request had to go through Commander Reynolds, a man whose reputation preceded him into every room he entered. He'd earned 3 Bronze Stars in Iraq, had personally trained some of the most elite shooters in naval special warfare, and was known throughout the base for his unwavering belief that certain military specialties required certain types of people. When his secretary handed him Vivian's application, he didn't even look up from his other paperwork. "Ma'am," he said without lifting his eyes, "this isn't a hobby shooting club. These men have been training for years specifically for this program. They've been selected from hundreds of candidates based on physical and psychological profiles. That took months to develop." I was standing in the back of his office, officially there to discuss training schedules, but really there to support my sister, and I watched Vivian's jaw tighten in that familiar way. She placed both hands flat on his desk and leaned forward slightly, a move that finally got his attention. "Sir, with respect, I'm not asking to skip any requirements or receive special consideration. I'm asking for the same opportunity to prove myself that you'd give any other qualified candidate." Her voice carried the same quiet authority I remembered from when she talked back to high school bullies who thought they could intimidate her. Commander Reynolds finally looked up, and I could see him taking her measure. What he saw was a woman in civilian clothes carrying herself like a soldier, speaking with confidence that couldn't be faked. But years of tradition and ingrained assumptions weren't going to be overcome by good posture and direct eye contact. "Miss Caldwell, I appreciate your military service, but Army marksmanship standards and SEAL-level precision are fundamentally different challenges. The men who attempt this evaluation have been specifically conditioned for the physical and mental demands we place on them." That's when Chief Petty Officer Martinez, who'd been reviewing candidate files at a nearby desk, decided to add his perspective. "Commander, no disrespect to the lady's service, but we're talking about shooting accuracy that has to hold up under conditions that would break most people. These aren't paper targets on a calm day at a civilian range. The comment hit exactly the wrong note with Vivian. I'd seen that flash in her eyes before, usually right before someone learned a lesson they wouldn't forget. She straightened up and fixed Martinez with a stare that could have frozen water. Chief, I've put rounds on target while taking incoming fire in the Kunar province. I've maintained accuracy standards while carrying a 60-pound pack through 100-degree heat. I've made shots that kept my squad alive when the alternative was coming home in boxes. The room had gone quiet except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of training exercises outside. But Sergeant Brooks, a former SEAL instructor built like a linebacker and notorious for his blunt assessments, couldn't let it go. Honey, he said with the kind of condescending smile that made my fists clench. Army marksmanship and SEAL-level precision are like comparing high school football to the NFL. Different leagues, different expectations, different everything. The word honey hung in the air like a challenge, and I watched several other instructors exchange knowing looks and barely suppressed grins. They were treating her like an amusing interruption to their day, a curiosity who'd wandered into the wrong building and needed to be gently redirected. Vivian didn't raise her voice or show any visible anger, but I knew that look. It was the same expression she'd worn when kids at school made fun of her hand-me-down clothes. The same quiet fury that preceded her putting 3 bullies in detention for underestimating what a ranch girl could do. Commander Reynolds, perhaps, sensing that the conversation was heading somewhere unproductive, held up a hand to quiet the room. He studied Vivian for a long moment, then made an offer that surprised everyone present. Fine. You want to prove yourself? Beat our top 5 current SEAL trainees in a comprehensive shooting evaluation. Multiple distances, multiple weapons, stress conditions, moving targets, compromised positions. You match their performance, we'll consider your application. You fail to meet the standard, you never bring this up again. The challenge was deliberately overwhelming, designed to make her back down gracefully and save everyone the embarrassment of watching her fail publicly. But they'd seriously misread their target. Without hesitation, Vivian looked Commander Reynolds directly in the eye and said, "When do we start?" The confidence in her voice was absolute, the same tone she'd used when accepting Grandpa's challenges to hit increasingly impossible targets. There wasn't a tremor of doubt, no pause to consider the implications of what she was agreeing to. Just pure, unwavering determination that filled the room like a physical presence. Commander Reynolds blinked, clearly expecting her to ask for time to think it over or negotiate the terms. Instead, he found himself scrambling to respond to someone who'd just called his bluff. The evaluation is scheduled for Friday morning at 0800 hours. 5 stages, cumulative scoring, no do-overs. I'll be there, Vivian replied, then turned and walked out of that office with the same measured stride she'd entered with. But I could see something had changed in those few minutes. The uncertainty that had been weighing on her since Grandpa's death was gone, replaced by the focused intensity I remembered from her competition days. That evening, I expected to find her at the base range, putting in extra practice hours and familiarizing herself with the course layout. Instead, she was sitting on the balcony of her hotel room, perfectly still, eyes closed, breathing in a rhythm that was almost meditative. When I asked what she was doing, she opened her eyes and gave me that small smile that meant she knew something. I didn't. Grandpa used to say that practice was for building habits, but the real shooting happened in the quiet spaces between thoughts, she explained. He taught me that when everything else falls away, when there's no noise in your head, that's when the bullet knows where to go. You just have to get your mind out of the way and trust what your body already knows. She pulled out Grandpa's worn leather journal, the one where he'd recorded shooting tips and life lessons in his careful handwriting. Some of the pages were water-stained from years of use. Others had sketches of shooting positions and wind calculations drawn in the margins. But the page she showed me was different. It was a letter he'd written to her before her first deployment, one she'd never mentioned before. "My dear Vivian," it read, "by the time you read this, you'll be facing something that tests not just your shooting, but who you are at your core. Remember that precision isn't about perfection. It's about consistency under pressure. The rifle doesn't care if you're scared, angry, or heartbroken. It only responds to discipline and focus. Trust your training. trust your instincts, and most of all, trust that you belong wherever your skills take you. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into the journal. I found this in his things after the funeral. He'd written it for this moment, even though he couldn't have known exactly what it would be. The next morning, instead of arriving early to scout the range or practice with the equipment, Vivian showed up exactly at 8 o'clock carrying only her grandfather's 1911 and a small range bag. The 5 SEAL trainees were already there, having spent the previous evening studying the course and discussing strategy. They looked like what they were: elite athletes in peak physical condition, men who'd been selected from hundreds of candidates, and trained for months specifically for this evaluation. Tyler Morrison, the squad leader and highest scoring shooter in the program, approached Vivian with what seemed like genuine concern. "Ma'am, I want you to know we're not trying to make this personal. We respect your service, but this evaluation has broken down Marines and Rangers. The physical demands alone are designed to push us past our limits." Vivian adjusted the strap on her range bag and looked at him with the same calm expression she'd worn in Commander Reynolds' office. "I appreciate that, Tyler, but I didn't come here to participate. I came here to win." The simplicity of that statement shifted something in the air. Morrison stepped back, suddenly understanding that he wasn't dealing with someone who hoped to do well, but someone who had already decided on the outcome. The other trainees exchanged glances, their casual confidence replaced by the recognition that they might have seriously underestimated their competition. I watched from the observation area as instructors began setting up the first stage, a precision shooting challenge at various distances. Vivian stood apart from the group, not antisocial but completely self-contained, like she was drawing energy from some internal source the rest of us couldn't access. She wasn't preparing for a test. She was preparing to honor a promise made to a man who'd believed in her potential before she even understood it herself. The evaluation was about to begin, and for the first time since entering that building, I started to believe that everyone who'd laughed might be in for the shock of their careers. The first stage was precision shooting at distances ranging from 50 to 300 yards, using standard Navy rifles that none of the candidates had trained with extensively. Tyler Morrison went first, posting respectable scores that had the instructors nodding approval. The other SEAL trainees followed, each one methodical and professional, hitting their targets with the kind of consistency that justified their selection for the program. When Vivian's turn came, she approached the firing line with that same unhurried pace I'd seen 1,000 times on Grandpa's range. She took exactly 3 minutes to examine the rifle, checking the scope alignment and testing the trigger pull, then settled into a shooting position that looked effortless, but put her in perfect harmony with the weapon. Her first shot rang out, and I watched through binoculars as the target downrange showed a perfect center hit. The second shot followed so quickly it seemed like an extension of the first, another dead center strike. By the time she'd completed the precision stage, she hadn't just matched the SEAL trainee's performance, she'd exceeded it by a margin that had Chief Martinez checking his scoring sheets twice. Stage 2 was rapid-fire close-quarters combat, where candidates had to engage multiple targets while moving through a simulated urban environment. The physical demands were brutal, requiring split-second decisions while maintaining accuracy under artificial stress. The SEAL trainees attacked this stage with aggressive efficiency, their scores reflecting months of specialized training. Vivian approached it differently. Where they used speed and intensity, she used flow and precision. She moved through the course like she was dancing with the targets, never rushing but never hesitating. Every shot was deliberate, every movement economical. When the smoke cleared, her accuracy rate was higher than any of the men who'd gone before her. But it was stage 3, the moving target simulation, where things got really interesting. This was where SEAL training showed its value, requiring candidates to track and engage targets while dealing with environmental variables and time pressure. Tyler Morrison posted the highest score of the day so far, a performance that had Commander Reynolds actually smiling. Vivian stepped up to the firing line, and suddenly everything about her changed. The calm, measured demeanor was still there, but underneath it was something predatory, focused in a way that made the hair on my neck stand up. She tracked those moving targets with supernatural precision, leading them perfectly, compensating for wind and distance like she was born to. When the stage ended, she'd not only beaten Morrison's score, she'd shattered it by 20%. The fourth stage pushed everyone to their limits. Candidates had to hit targets while hanging upside down, shooting from awkward positions designed to test their ability to maintain accuracy when their bodies were screaming in protest. This was where the SEAL trainees' superior physical conditioning should have given them an insurmountable advantage. Instead, Vivian turned in a performance that left everyone speechless. She attacked each compromised position with technical precision, adjusting her breathing and grip to compensate for the awkward angles. Her groupings were tighter than anything the instructors had seen in 2 years of running this evaluation. Sergeant Brooks, the man who'd called her honey just days before, was staring at the targets like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then came Stage 5, the stress test that separated pretenders from legends. Candidates had to complete a grueling obstacle course designed to max out their heart rate and push them beyond exhaustion, then immediately transition to precision shooting while their bodies were in complete rebellion. The 5 SEAL trainees went first, posting scores that reflected the brutal physical demands. Even Morrison, the program's top performer, struggled to maintain accuracy while his heart was hammering and his hands were shaking from exertion. Vivian approached the obstacle course like it was a warm-up exercise. She moved through it with controlled aggression, never wasting energy but never holding back. When she reached the shooting station, breathing hard and covered in sweat, she did something that stopped everyone cold. She paused for exactly 3 seconds, closed her eyes, and performed the same centering ritual I'd watched her do before every important shot since she was 12 years old. The final target was a playing card at 75 yards in crosswind conditions. Not just hitting it, but splitting it perfectly down the middle. The SEAL trainees had all attempted this shot and failed. It was considered more of a psychological challenge than a realistic expectation. Vivian chambered around, exhaled slowly, and fired once. The card split perfectly in half, fluttering to the ground in 2 equal pieces. For 10 seconds, nobody moved or spoke. Then Commander Reynolds walked downrange, picked up the split card, and returned shaking his head in complete disbelief. The silence that followed that impossible shot lasted exactly 13 seconds. I know because I counted every one of them, watching as a room full of hardened military professionals tried to process what they'd just witnessed. Then Commander Reynolds spoke, his voice carrying a mixture of respect and bewilderment that I'd never heard from him before. In 22 years of military service, across 3 combat deployments and more training evaluations than I can count, I have never seen marksmanship like that. He held up the perfectly split playing card, turning it so everyone could see the clean line where Vivian's bullet had divided it. This isn't just exceptional shooting, this is artistry. The transformation in that room was immediate and complete. Tyler Morrison, who'd approached her with condescending concern just hours earlier, was the first to cross the distance between them. He extended his hand with genuine respect, his earlier skepticism replaced by something approaching awe. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology and a whole lot of respect," he said, gripping her hand firmly. "What you just did out there wasn't just beating us. You showed us what we're supposed to aspire to." Sergeant Brooks, the mountain of a man who'd dismissed her as honey and compared her to high school football, approached next. The cocky smile was gone, replaced by the kind of humility that only comes from being thoroughly proven wrong. "Miss, Caldwell, I was out of line earlier, and I was dead wrong. What you accomplished today is going to be talked about for years." But it was Chief Martinez's reaction that surprised me most. He'd been taking notes throughout the evaluation, documenting scores with clinical detachment, but now he was staring at his clipboard like the numbers didn't make sense. "Ma'am, I've been running evaluations for 8 years, and I've never had to create a new scoring category before today. You didn't just pass this evaluation, you redefined what's possible." Commander Reynolds didn't waste time with ceremony. Within an hour, he'd not only approved Vivian for the advanced program, but recommended her for an instructor position that had never been offered to someone outside the SEAL community. "We've been teaching these men to shoot like machines," he told me later. "Precise, reliable, consistent. She shoots like an artist who happens to be carrying a rifle." The news spread through the base faster than wildfire, By evening, instructors from other programs were stopping by to introduce themselves and hear about the woman who'd made history on the range. But the moment that mattered most happened when we were alone, walking back to her hotel as the sun set over the Pacific. "Theo," she said, stopping to pull out her phone. "I need to call Mom and tell her what happened. But first, I want to show you something." She reached into her range bag and pulled out Grandpa's 1911, the one that had been his constant companion through Korea and 30 years of ranch life afterward. I felt him with me out there today. Not like some mystical presence, but like everything he taught me had been waiting for exactly this moment. For the first time since his funeral, Vivian smiled the way she used to. Not the careful, polite expression she'd worn for months, but the genuine joy I remembered from our childhood. I spent so long trying to prove I belonged somewhere that I forgot I already did. Grandpa didn't raise me to fit in. He raised me to stand out. 6 months later, Vivian became the first former Army personnel to successfully integrate into the Navy's Advanced Marksmanship program, not as a student, but as a specialized instructor. She keeps Grandpa's photo on her desk and his 1911 in her holster, training the next generation of elite shooters with the same patience and wisdom he'd shown her. The program she helped develop has trained over 60 candidates, with a success rate that's revolutionized how the military approaches precision marksmanship training. But more importantly, it proved that excellence doesn't recognize artificial boundaries, that skill and dedication matter more than preconceptions or prejudices. Every time I see her on that range now, teaching young sailors and Marines the fundamentals of precision shooting, I'm reminded of something Grandpa used to say. The target doesn't care who's holding the rifle. It only responds to whoever respects it enough to do the work. Vivian proved that day that sometimes the people who doubt us most are the ones who most need to see what we're capable of. She didn't just honor Grandpa's memory, she showed everyone present what happens when unwavering belief meets uncompromising skill. The best way to silence skeptics isn't with arguments or explanations, it's with results that speak so clearly that no response is necessary except respect.